stream. Joining us now, the senior leader Brinda Karat. She's a Politburo member of the CPI and senior leader. Thanks, ma'am, very much for being with us. In your mind,
Thank you,
is Manrega and the lack of additional funds to Manrega perhaps the most glaring example of how millions who are impoverished continue to suffer?
You're absolutely right, because if we look at the level of rural distress, which is also reflected, at least to some extent, in the economic survey, we find that the criminal callousness of this government is not really a question, Vishnu, of additional funds for Rega. If you look at the revised estimates and the budget estimates, there's actually a cut of around 26% as far as Manrega funds are concerned. Now the government in a footnote has said, well, it's a demand-driven program, so if they need more funds, we'll give it. But then you're cheating the people as far as managing the deficit is concerned. So you're saying that, oh, we do have the funds, we'll give the funds when it's required. But even now, in India, there is a huge backlog of those who have worked on Manrega sites and not yet got their wages. So I think Manrega is one very important issue, but even more than that, Vishnu, if you look at the entire agriculture sector, and after all, we have just seen a most historic struggle of Kisans against the 3 farm agri laws, one would have thought that the government would have shown at least some element of sensitivity towards the needs of farmers, instead of which, if you look at the heads of agriculture and agriculture-related activities, there's a huge cut of 1 lakh crore rupees as far as allocations to agriculture is concerned.
You know,
and
the other key point,
claims made by Nirmala ji.
Ma'am, I'm just sorry to interrupt, because this health is another area which is, you know, it's up by less than 1%. At a time when, you know, we've been hit in this country in the manner in which we have, again, this is another key social sector which has been, you know, not enough has been done. Just a 1% jump.
Absolutely. And if you look at inflation and you factor in inflation, it's actually a cut as far as real term allocations for health is concerned. So every single important social sector scheme and every single important stimulus which was required to push the Indian economy out of the pandemic impacted, and in fact, as the economic survey states, even before the pandemic, we were in a recessionary mode. But this government, even unlike the, you know, the most developed countries in the world, even low-income countries who have increased expenditure, this government is actually doing nothing of the sort. And if you look at the total expenditure, as a portion of GDP, as a proportion of GDP.
You aren't convinced about what they're saying about CapEx?
CapEx, you see, no, about CapEx, even if you look at CapEx and the claims that they have made, that they have spent more on CapEx in the last financial year. But out of that claim, the small print shows that 51,000 crores which they claim was spent as CapEx was actually dealing with the debt of Air India.
Right.
So they say there's going to be a huge increase. Yeah, that is it. Right. They're dealing with that debt. They say 51,000 crores.
But what about
education,
education, because that is up considerably.
So we don't know.
Education up 18%.
I beg your pardon?
Education, I'm just quickly going through sectors.
Education
up 18%.
Yeah, but I would really like to. I would like
it's
to
1
see
lakh
the
crores
small
now,
print
up
on
from
that.
88,000 crores. Do you welcome that?
I've seen that.
Yes.
I have seen that. But when you look at the different schemes in education, for example, if you look at the educational, the umbrella expenditure for STs and STs, as far as education is concerned, and the huge claims and promises made in the last budget for setting up the Eklavya residential schools, they have not actually spent even what they had budgeted for. So on education, I would like to wait and see exactly what and where the expenditure is. What I have seen is that they are now planning global universities. They're going to have, like you have a special economic zone where no laws for workers exist. They're planning to have global universities without domestic regulations. So I'd like to see exactly for whom and what the expenditure is all about before I comment. But look at Anganwadis, look at ASHA workers. I mean, Vishnu, these are front-line workers. Nirmala Ji's talked about updating. By doing what? By providing some linkages with internet. But what about their wages? What about their salaries? What about their allowances?
That brings me to my new question. You know, we've spoken about Manrega, we've spoken about the agriculture sector. What about a social security net or some sort of a financial safety net for the urban poor? Particularly at a time like this when we've seen the divide between those, you know, who are wealthy and those who are poor in urban centers. I mean, it's a huge chasm now, and there is no security, there is no income tax relief to start with, right? Laborers in cities and towns continue to suffer immensely over the last 2 years. Joblessness is a huge issue. What about some security for the urban poor?
Well, just look at it this way. They've set up an e-portal to register unorganized sector workers after the huge crisis that we saw unfold in India as far as migrant workers are concerned. So now you have lakhs of workers registered, but what is the benefit of it? You are neither providing them guaranteed employment and nor are you providing them any kind of help or assistance. Cash transfers are the most essential aspect today if you want to even boost the market. Even the big corporates today are saying, the first time I've heard them speaking, to increase the purchasing power of the poor.
Right.
But this government is so totally callous towards the poorer sections of society that they are not prepared to give any income transfer schemes to a population when income inequality in India is one of the worst in the world.
Ma'am, one final question.
So I think this budget.
Sure. Ma'am, one final question to you.
Yeah.
You know, we've gone through sector by sector, but one of the areas where a lot of people would say the government has done well in terms of infrastructure is roads. And the outlay again, and the target is to actually double the amount of roads, kilometers of roads that we've done in the last financial year. And there's progress on the ground as well. Is this an area, essential infrastructure, where we've done well?
Who is it for? Who's financing it? The petroleum says, the road says, who is financing it?
Well, it depends on the project. There's not one answer.
The question is, this money, this money is coming from whom and where? This money is coming from the pockets of the people who today can't afford to travel from Delhi to Calcutta because you have raised the fares, you've hiked the prices of petrol and diesel, you've made transport so expensive that people whose pockets you have picked to build those fine highways and roads are people who can't travel on them because they don't have money in their pockets.
Right.
I would say if the government is interested in using taxes in a way which is of direct benefit to the people, first of all, they should have increased tax on corporates, they should have increased income tax for the rich, and they should have rolled back the exorbitant loot that they have indulged in on the huge hikes of petrol, diesel, and gas. Right. And by the way, Vishnu, the gas cylinder is another scam story because the subsidies on gas and gas cylinders have suffered such a drastic cut and decrease as to make the Ujjwala scheme not Ujjwala but Andhera.
All right.
That is what this government has done as far as the gas cylinders are
All right.
concerned.
Well, ma'am.
Therefore, I would just say, Vishnu, this budget is not a budget for the people, and I challenge the Prime Minister and his statement. ये जनता के पक्ष की बजट है, नहीं मोदी जी, जनता के पक्ष की नहीं, ये आपकी क्रोनी कैपिटलिस्ट जो आपके दोस्त है उनकी पक्ष की है. माफ कीजिए अगर ये टिप्पणी मेरी आपको पसंद नहीं आया.
All right, ma'am, very direct. Thanks very much for sharing those views, cutting across sectors and your concerns over there on how this isn't a people-friendly budget, and it's certainly not a budget for the poor.